My guest today is Megan Tuff of the Change Leadership Company, a consultancy that specialises in developing change capability and leadership skills. Megan helps businesses to implement change successfully by providing strategic advice, planning support and education about how change works. Megan, welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me, Susie.
What are the typical situations when you're called in to provide advice?
There's really two big ones. One is when a company has a massive change agenda and they realise that they need some support in developing the right strategy and approach to make it as effective as possible. And the other is when they're looking to educate their workforce about change, whether that's leaders or employees, so I can come in to help them with that.
And what aspects of change do organisations normally mess up?
Wow, that's a great question, Susie. I think there's a few. Really, what I see the most is they don't really work effectively on the people side of change. So we're really great at processes and putting together lists of things to do, but we're not so great at thinking about what are our people going through and what should I be doing to minimise the effect on them.
As human beings, I know certainly change can sometimes be daunting when you're looking at making major change in an organisation. How do you bring everyone on board and have them feel safe, perhaps, I don't know if safe's the right word, about the change that's about to happen?
Yeah, that's nirvana, isn't it? That's what everybody wants to do. It's actually quite hard to achieve because everybody goes through change at their own pace. So you can't do one thing and expect that to work for everybody. You've really got to do multiple activities to address multiple concerns, and you've got to continue to do that throughout the change initiative. So the answer is there is no one answer, but you need to have leaders who know what they're doing and have multiple strategies that are integrated and work together.
What are some of the suggestions that you do make to leaders?
To educate themselves about change so they understand the process that they themselves will go through and their teams will go through. And then really to work on strategies to minimise resistance. So understanding what people might be afraid of. For example, effects on their jobs or changing activities or moving to new teams. And working to minimise the effect that has on the person by answering their questions early, being open with communication, keeping them informed all the way through the process. Some of these things that sound like common sense but are so often forgotten.
You've worked with a lot of Australia's big companies when they've merged with other organisations. Yes. And we tend to see that sometimes departments disappear or people lose their peers. But what do you find the most effective mergers or the organisations that merge do that has those mergers work?
The ones that I've seen that work most effectively have a very strong change leadership capability, and that's this kind of amorphous bucket of tangible and intangible skills. So understanding about change and change processes, and also the right personal skills to get the message across and to make people feel involved and engaged in the process, even when it may be perhaps not the best thing for them personally. So change leadership capability for me is something we don't do that well in corporate Australia, but I think it's one of the foundational skills that organisations need to have.
It seems still to me, even in this conversation, that change has this mystery about it. So could you give us an example that is a real obvious example of this was the situation, this is the change the leaders implemented, and these were the results, good or bad, that happened? Because it does seem a mystery.
It does, and part of my job, I feel, is to demystify the change process, because I actually don't think it's that hard, as long as you know what you're doing. But here's an example for you. I was working in a large financial services organisation which had just brought another company on board, and they wanted to go through a process of aligning job titles. Right. Sounds easy, right? So they thought, this is not actually about changing anything for anyone. We just want to make your title there the same as that person's title there, because they kind of do the same job. So they announced the new job titles, and I said to them, I think you might be underestimating the effect this is going to have on people. Some people were losing a senior from their job title, some people were changing from manager to analyst, all of these kind of things. And they were like, you know what, no, it doesn't mean anything, it's just an alignment exercise. And when they actually came out with the announcement, people really felt like their status had been threatened,
Is that right?
that perhaps they were being told they weren't good at their jobs, like a whole range of things that if they just really thought that through, they might have anticipated that reaction. So that's an example of underestimating the effect of change, which I think we do a lot.
And in that instance, was there a corrective measure put in place, or did it work itself out?
Well, in the end, the change had happened, and the change was the change, and the job titles were the job titles. So they pushed it through, but it could have happened in a much more constructive way.
Is there a way to predict the impact that change will make?
I think if you do a change impact analysis up front, which is a really important component of any change agenda, no matter how large or small, if you get the right people in the room thinking about those change impacts, you can usually nail about 80% of the reactions that you're going to expect. And that's a great exercise to do, because it actually means you'll develop strategies to minimise those impacts right at the start, instead of halfway through the change when people are reacting to what you're doing because you haven't thought it through properly. So the change impact analysis is really important, and I usually encourage people not to do that on their own, but to get a diverse group in the room with multiple views, so that you can actually get a good estimation of what the reaction will be.
Now, obviously you work with a lot of large companies, but even on a small business scale, how consultative should leaders be when it comes to implementing change, do you think?
That's a great question, and the great thing about the answer is that people are people, no matter whether they work in a business of 10 or a business of 1,000. So whether you're a leader in a small business or not, the principles are actually the same. Involving people, telling them what's happening, giving them as much certainty as possible, not doing things that kind of threaten where they see themselves in the world, or trying to minimise those impacts, are all great change practices. The less you do of just telling people the outcome and saying, you know, that's it, live with it, or bad luck, you know, that's, for any leader, that's really not an effective strategy.
No. Just in wrapping up, as a small business owner, you've been in business for a number of years, you work with large corporations, but your team itself is quite small. What advice do you have for other businesswomen?
The two things that really stand out for me, with the benefit of hindsight now, are one, to nurture your relationships, and I think that's so important, to pick the group of people that you're going to physically stay in contact with, not by Twitter or blogs or emails, but there'll be a core group of people that you want to really nurture a relationship with over time. That's the first thing. And the second thing I would say is do what you can to build your brand and stand out in your arena, whatever that is. People like to hear opinions, whether they're dissenting or the same, and if you don't make your voice heard, you just look like a lamb in a flock of lambs, really. So you need to be the black sheep in the flock.
That's great advice. Thank you so much for joining us.
You're welcome.